There's something about the words haunted mansion that instantly grabs our imagination. The phrase conjures visions of cobwebbed staircases, flickering candles, and echoes in the dark where no one should be standing. Ghost stories are as old as human history, but they take on a new kind of weight when they intersect with people we know, faces we've laughed with, names we recognize, public figures who seem far removed from supernatural danger. That's exactly why the story of Matt Rife and Elton Castee's terrifying night in a haunted mansion has spread like wildfire. Matt Rife, the fast-rising comedian known for his sharp wit and magnetic stage presence, isn't someone you'd expect to find hunting ghosts. Elton Castee, however, is no stranger to the paranormal. As the co-creator of the YouTube series Overnight and TFIL, he's built a career chasing mysteries in abandoned hospitals, graveyards, and cursed homes. When these two worlds collided inside a mansion with a history soaked in death and dread, the results were nothing short of horrifying. The house itself was more than just a spooky backdrop. This wasn't a cheap Halloween attraction or an abandoned building dressed up for scares. This was a property steeped in blood and tragedy, a mansion whispered about in hushed tones by locals who swore it was cursed. For decades, strange lights had been seen in its windows long after it was abandoned. Neighbors claimed they heard screams in the night, even when no one was supposed to be inside. And those brave enough to step through its doors rarely stayed long. On that night, Matt and Elton weren't just performing a stunt for the camera. They were walking into a place with a reputation so sinister that even seasoned paranormal investigators hesitated before entering. What they encountered would test not just their courage, but also their sanity. The mansion's history. Every haunted house has a story, and this one began more than a century ago. The mansion had been built in the late 1800s by a wealthy industrialist whose fortune was matched only by his eccentricities. Locals at the time whispered about the strange rituals he hosted in the home's grand ballroom, late-night gatherings filled with chanting, flickering lights, and sounds that seemed to reverberate through the woods surrounding the estate. When the industrialist died, suddenly under mysterious circumstances, the house passed through a series of owners, each one leaving behind another layer of tragedy. One family was torn apart when their eldest son vanished in the home and was never found. Another owner, a socialite known for extravagant parties, was discovered dead at the base of the mansion's staircase. Police ruled it an accident, but servants whispered she had been pushed. By the mid-20th century, the mansion was abandoned. Over the decades, thrill seekers broke in, only to flee in terror after reporting shadows that followed them, footsteps echoing when no one else was present, and doors slamming shut on their own. Paranormal investigators declared the house one of the most active locations they had ever encountered. This was the backdrop for Matt and Elton's exploration. They knew the risks. They knew the stories. But neither of them could have anticipated just how dark the night would become. Preparing for the investigation, the plan was simple. Spend the night inside the mansion, document everything, and see if the legends held any truth. Elton, experienced in these kinds of investigations, brought along equipment. EMF readers to detect electromagnetic anomalies, spirit boxes to capture potential voices, thermal cameras, and night vision gear. Matt, by contrast, arrived with little more than his wit. Known for roasting hecklers in comedy clubs, he treated the trip with a mixture of bravado and skepticism. He cracked jokes as they entered, teasing Elton about ghost cliches and promising he'd make the spirits laugh if nothing else. But beneath the humor, there was unease. It showed in the way Matt glanced over his shoulder as they walked up the creaking staircase, or how his jokes landed a little too quickly, as if covering nerves. The air inside the mansion was suffocating. Dust coated every surface. Portraits with cracked glass stared down from the walls. Curtains, moth-eaten and gray, swayed though no breeze was present. The smell of rot and mildew clung to the hallways. And there was silence, the kind of silence that feels alive, pressing in on you, making your skin crawl. It didn't take long for things to begin. First signs of activity. As Elton set up equipment in what had once been the mansion's library, Matt wandered near a broken fireplace. Suddenly, he froze. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice lower now, stripped of its earlier sarcasm. Elton shook his head, but Matt swore he heard a woman's voice, faint and almost pleading. Moments later, the EMF reader spiked. The device, designed to measure electromagnetic fields, is often used in paranormal investigations as spirits are believed to manipulate energy. The numbers jumped erratically, far beyond what could be explained by faulty wiring in an abandoned home. Elton crouched over the spirit box, began asking questions aloud. "Is someone here with us? Can you tell us your name?" Static filled the room, a white noise hum that made every hair on the back of their necks stand on end. And then, through the static, a single word: leave. Both men went silent. For Elton, this wasn't the first time he'd heard a spirit box reply, but the clarity of the voice was chilling. For Matt, who had walked in expecting cheap thrills at best, the reality began to sink in. Shadows in the hall. Determined to press on, they moved deeper into the mansion, their flashlights cutting thin beams through the dark. They reached the grand staircase, its wood warped but still imposing, and began to ascend. Halfway up, Matt stopped. There, just ahead of him, was a shadow. It wasn't cast by their flashlights. It moved independently, crossing the landing with deliberate steps. He blinked, thinking it was his imagination, but Elton saw it too. Their cameras captured only faint blurs, but the men were adamant. They had just witnessed something walking across the upper floor. Nervous laughter bubbled out of Matt, but his voice shook. "Okay, no, that was not my imagination. Tell me you saw that. Please tell me you saw that." Elton nodded grimly. "I saw it." The shadow didn't return, but the atmosphere grew heavier, as if the house itself had awakened. The men pressed on, their nerves fraying with every creak of the floorboards. The room at the end of the hall. At the far end of the upstairs corridor, they found a locked door. Unlike the other rooms, which were accessible and ransacked, this one remained sealed. Elton produced a small crowbar and forced it open, the wood splintering loudly. Inside was a bedroom, eerily preserved compared to the rest of the house. The bed was still made, though the sheets were yellowed with age. A rocking chair sat by the window, angled toward the door, as if waiting. On the wall, above the bed, were words carved into the plaster. "Get out." Matt's bravado finally cracked. Why is it always "get out"? Why can't it ever be like "welcome home"? His joke fell flat. Neither of them laughed. As Elton scanned the room with the thermal camera, the device picked up a figure in the rocking chair, cold, motionless, sitting as if someone invisible occupied it. But when they turned their flashlights on the chair, it was empty. The spirit box flared again. "Stay," it whispered, the opposite of the warning they had seen carved into the wall. Conflicting messages, a push and a pull. Something wanted them gone, something else wanted them trapped. Matt's experience. It was Matt, the skeptic, who experienced the night's most terrifying moment. While Elton examined the room, Matt leaned against the doorway. Suddenly, his face went pale. He later described it as a sensation of being grabbed, not a light brush, but a firm grip on his wrist, icy and unyielding. He yanked his arm back, stumbling into the hallway. "Something just touched me," he gasped, holding up his arm. The skin showed faint red marks, as though fingers had wrapped around it. The cameras caught his genuine panic. No amount of comedy training could have faked the fear in his eyes. For a moment, Matt wanted to leave. The jokes, the curiosity, the bravado, all of it evaporated. He told Elton he was done. But Elton, ever the investigator, persuaded him to push just a little further. They had come this far, and the mansion wasn't finished with them yet. As the night stretched on, the horrors inside the mansion grew darker. The voices became clearer, the shadows bolder, the air heavier, and what Matt and Elton uncovered in the mansion's basement, the part of the house most locals refused to enter, would leave them shaken to their core. Because if the upper floors were haunted by whispers and shadows, the basement held something far worse. Something that made them both question whether they would make it out at all. Basements are different from the rest of a house. Even in ordinary homes, they carry a weight, a silence, a sense of being closer to something hidden. But in a mansion already thick with a history of tragedy, the basement was more than unsettling. It was a threshold. For decades, locals whispered that the worst of the mansion's energy lay below ground. Stories of satanic rituals, chained spirits, and even the remains of the missing had clung to that place like mold to damp stone. Matt Rife and Elton Castee stood at the top of the narrow staircase, the air colder there than anywhere else in the house. Their flashlights flickered, sputtering as though drained by an unseen hand. Elton checked the batteries. They were fresh, brand new. But paranormal investigators know what this means. Energy being siphoned. Something down there didn't just want attention, it wanted power. Matt cracked a joke, his voice uneven. You know, horror movies always start like this. Two idiots in a basement. Guess which one of us dies first? But even he didn't laugh. The tension was too thick, the silence too charged. Together, they descended into the dark. The descent. The steps groaned under their weight. The walls, made of stone and damp with decades of neglect, seemed to close in tighter with each step downward. A faint dripping sound echoed through the passage, though no pipes remained in the house. When they reached the bottom, the smell hit them. Musty, metallic, something like rust but sharper. Elton's flashlight beam swept across the space, revealing a large chamber. Old shelves lined the walls, some toppled, others still holding jars whose contents had long since decayed into unidentifiable sludge. A furnace sat in the corner, its iron mouth blackened, as though it had once burned things that were never meant to burn. And on the floor, drawn in faded chalk, but still visible, was a circle, a ritual circle, symbols etched with care, arcs connecting them, and at the center, wax drippings from countless candles. Matt's voice cracked. Nope, absolutely not. I've seen enough horror movies to know what this is. Elton crouched to examine the circle, careful not to touch it. This looks like something they would have used in rituals, he whispered. And if the stories are true, this is where it all started. The EMF reader began to shriek. The basement awakens. At first, it was subtle, a drop in temperature, their breath visible in the beam of the flashlight. Then came the footsteps, not above them, not behind them, but all around, circling, moving through the walls, as if unseen figures walked just out of sight. Matt's panic rose. Elton, someone's down here. I'm not kidding. Elton shook his head. There's no one else here. Then came the voices. Not through the spirit box this time, but through the air itself. Faint whispers layered and overlapping in languages neither of them recognized. The sound grew louder, filling the chamber, until it seemed as though the walls themselves were speaking. Matt clutched his wrist again, the same one that had been grabbed upstairs. It's burning, he muttered, showing Elton his skin. The faint marks had darkened into something angrier, redder, like the grip had sunk deeper. The thermal camera picked up shapes in the circle. Not one, not two, but several figures standing shoulder to shoulder, cold silhouettes in a space that should have been empty. Elton lowered the camera, looked with his own eyes, and saw nothing. But the evidence was undeniable. They were not alone. The furnace drawn by instinct, or perhaps something else, Elton approached the furnace. Its door creaked open with resistance, and a blast of air rushed out, foul and suffocating. Inside were charred fragments, too small to identify, but unmistakably bone. Matt recoiled. Tell me that's animal, please. Tell me that's not what I think it is. Elton couldn't answer. His face said enough. The furnace groaned, the metal shifting as though something pressed against it from within. Then, with a violent clang, the door slammed shut on its own. The sound reverberated through the chamber, and for a moment, the whispers ceased. Silence. Heavy. Oppressive. And then the rocking chair upstairs began to creak. They could hear it. From 2 floors below, through thick walls and rotting beams, the sound traveled down, slow, deliberate, back and forth, back and forth. Something upstairs was moving the chair, something that wanted them to know it was still there. Matt's breaking point. For Matt, this was the moment when the thin shield of humor he had wrapped around himself finally shattered. Up until now, he had managed to keep the fear at bay with sarcasm and jokes, using laughter as a weapon against the darkness pressing in on them. But the mansion had grown heavier with every passing minute, its silence turning into a suffocating roar in his mind. Now standing at the edge of that basement chamber, surrounded by whispers that seemed to crawl into his very bones, the comedian was gone. What remained was a man staring into something he couldn't understand, and he was terrified. His voice cracked, trembling in a way Elton had never heard before. "Elton, I'm not kidding anymore," he said, every syllable carrying the weight of desperation. "Whatever this is, I don't want to be here when it gets worse." His usual sharp delivery was gone, replaced by raw pleading. For the first time that night, Matt didn't care how he looked or how his words might sound on camera. He just wanted out. Elton, though clearly shaken himself, didn't give in so easily. Years of chasing shadows in abandoned hospitals, asylums, and forgotten graveyards had taught him a difficult truth. The moments when fear reached its peak were often the moments when the veil between worlds thinned the most. "We need to document this," he argued, his voice steady, though his hands shook as he adjusted the camera. "If we leave now, it's all wasted." "We're closer than ever to capturing something undeniable." Matt shook his head violently, pacing near the base of the stairs. His skin was pale, almost gray, and sweat glistened across his forehead under the beam of Elton's flashlight. His breaths came short and fast, like someone cornered. His eyes darted from shadow to shadow, expecting each one to spring to life, to grab him, to drag him back into the circle. Yet, for reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't bolt. Any rational man would have run, sprinted out of the front door, and never looked back. But Matt stayed rooted to the spot. Maybe it was loyalty to Elton, unwilling to abandon his friend in the heart of danger. Maybe it was pride, the stubborn refusal to be remembered as the one who cracked under pressure. Or maybe it was something far darker, the house itself wrapping its unseen fingers around him, holding him in place like a spider, savoring prey caught in its web. Whatever the reason, Matt remained, and that decision would take them both deeper into the nightmare. The apparition, then it happened, the moment that would leave both men scarred. From the corner of the basement, near the ritual circle, a figure began to form. At first, it was a shimmer like heat rising from asphalt. Then it thickened, darkened, and took shape. A woman, tall and gaunt, her features obscured, but her outline clear. Her head tilted unnaturally to the side, her arms hanging stiff, and her presence radiating a hatred that filled the room like poison. Matt froze, his mouth open but no words coming out. Elton, camera shaking in his hands, tried to steady the shot. The figure stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Each movement jerky, unnatural, as though her body wasn't built for motion. And then she spoke. Not a whisper, not static, but a voice that filled the chamber with bone-deep resonance. "You shouldn't be here." The lights cut out. Panic in the dark. The basement plunged into pitch black. Elton fumbled with his flashlight, smacking it until it flickered back on. When the beam returned, the figure was gone, but the ritual circle glowed faintly, its chalk lines pulsing like embers. Matt's scream echoed through the chamber. He clutched his wrist again, collapsing to his knees. The marks had deepened into welts, angry and red, as if invisible claws raked across his skin. Elton dragged him to his feet, adrenaline surging. "We have to get out." Now they stumbled toward the stairs, equipment clattering, cameras swinging wildly. The whispers returned, louder now, chasing them through the dark. A guttural laugh echoed from the furnace, deep and mocking, as though something inside celebrated their fear. Each step upward felt like climbing through molasses. The air thickened, pressing down on their chests, making it hard to breathe. Behind them, footsteps followed, heavy and deliberate. Neither dared to look back. The escape bursting through the basement door, they raced down the hallway. The rocking chair upstairs still creaked, its rhythm accelerating, manic and violent. Portraits fell from the walls, glass shattering under their feet. Doors slammed shut as they passed, as if the house itself tried to trap them. At the grand staircase, Matt nearly tripped, catching himself on the banister. Elton shoved him forward, both of them gasping, their lungs burning. They could hear the voice again, not behind them now, but above. From the landing. "Stay." They didn't stop. They didn't look. They barreled through the front door, the wood splintering as it crashed open, and stumbled into the night. The cool air outside hit them like salvation, the weight of the house lifting instantly. For a long moment, they just stood there, bent over, trying to catch their breath. Matt's arm throbbed, the welts raw against his skin. Elton's hands shook so badly he could barely hold the camera. Neither spoke. There was nothing to say. Aftermath. The footage they captured was chilling. The spirit box voices, the EMF spikes, the glowing ritual circle, and, most horrifying of all, the shadowy apparition in the basement. When the video was released, it spread rapidly, shocking even seasoned paranormal enthusiasts. Viewers debated whether what they had seen was real, exaggerated, or something in between. But for Matt and Elton, there was no debate. They had lived it. Matt later admitted it was one of the scariest experiences of his life. A man who could stand in front of thousands and deliver jokes without fear had been reduced to trembling silence by something unseen. "I don't ever want to go back," he confessed. Whatever was in that house, it wanted us, and I don't think it was going to let us leave without a fight. Elton, though accustomed to haunted places, admitted this one was different. He had been scratched before, heard voices, seen shadows, but the mansion carried a malevolence he couldn't shake. It felt intelligent, he said. It felt like it knew us, like it wanted to hurt us specifically. The mansion today. The mansion still stands. Locals still whisper about it, though fewer dare to approach since the night of Matt and Elton's investigation. Some claim the house has grown more active, as if stirred by their presence. Others insist it was always that way, waiting for the right people to walk through its doors. No one has purchased the property in decades. Realtors won't list it. Police avoid calls about it unless absolutely necessary. It sits in silence, its windows like dark eyes watching the world, waiting for its next visitors. What Matt Rife and Elton Castee found inside that haunted mansion was more than just a ghost story. It was a confrontation with something ancient, something malevolent, something that left its mark not just on their equipment, but on their bodies and minds. For Matt, it shattered the boundary between skepticism and belief. For Elton, it reinforced the dangerous truth he had always known, that not all spirits want to be found, and some places should never be disturbed. And as for the mansion itself, it waits, silent, watching, until the next door creaks open and the next voice calls out from the dark. What Matt Rife and Elton Castee experienced inside that mansion is more than a story of creaking floors and cold spots. It's a reminder that some places are never empty and some histories refuse to stay buried. Their night was a confrontation with forces that defy explanation, and it left them with scars that will never fully heal. But the question remains, was it simply a haunted house or something far darker that chose to reveal itself that night? We want to hear what you think. Was this the work of restless spirits, echoes of a violent past, or something even more sinister? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might unlock a truth others have missed. And if you want more stories where legends collide with the unknown, don't forget to like, share, and hit that subscribe button. This is Icon Legends, where the past never stays silent and the truth is always waiting in the dark.